It's a pleasure to have you join me on this virtual journey. Welcome, everyone, to our latest video where we'll be exploring The Magic Mountain. The Magic Mountain is a novel by Thomas Mann. It was first published in Germany in November 1924. Since then, it has gone through numerous editions and translations into many languages. It is regarded by some as an influential work of 20th German literature. Let's transition to background and uncover its significance. Mann started writing The Magic Mountain in 1912. It began as a novella that revisited aspects of death in Venice, another Mann novel, in a humorous way. The newer work reflected his experiences and impressions from a time when his wife, who was suffering from respiratory disease, resided at Doctor in Davos, Switzerland. In numerous letters, which no longer exist, she wrote to her husband about everyday life in the sanatorium. During a 3-week visit in May and June 1912, Mann obtained first-hand impressions and became acquainted with the team of doctors and patients. According to an afterword that was later included in the English translation of the novel, this stay inspired the opening chapter, Arrival. The beginning of World War I interrupted work on the book. Like many other Germans, Mann supported the German Empire. In a particular mental state which he described as sympathy with death, he wrote the essays Janken im Krieg, Gut Feldpost, and Friedrich und die Große Koalition, examples of an intellectual military service which he regarded as his duty. In response to anti-war intellectuals, Thomas Mann wrote a long essay, Reflections of a Non-Political Man, which came out in 1918. However, his position was shaken by these intellectuals, such as his older brother Heinrich, who, unlike Thomas, did not support the German state. On the contrary, Heinrich was the author of the satirical novel Der Untertan and the essay Zola, where he defended the idea of an inevitable defeat of Germany, which would then lead to its democratization. The end of the war led Thomas Mann to rethink his position, and in 1919, he changed the tone of the novel to reflect the reality of war rather than a romanticized depiction of it, and to include conflict between characters that was inspired by the one between his brother and himself. Mann undertook a major re-examination of European bourgeois society. He explored the sources of the destructiveness displayed by much of civilized humanity. He was also drawn to speculate about more general questions related to personal attitudes to life, health, illness, sexuality, and mortality. His political stance during this period changed from opposing the Weimar Republic to supporting it. Der Zauberberg was eventually published in 2 volumes by South Fischer Verlag in Berlin. Get ready for an exciting exploration as we unravel the mysteries of plot summary. Thumberpreiter mountain scenery at Davos. The novel's alpine setting, the narrative opens in the decade before World War I. It introduces the protagonist, Hans Kastrup, the only child of a Hamburg merchant family. Following the early death of his parents, Kastrup was brought up by his grandfather and, later, by a maternal uncle named James Teenaple. Kastrup is in his earlies, about to take up a shipbuilding career in Hamburg, his hometown. Before beginning work, he undertakes a journey to visit his tubercular cousin, Joachim Ziemßen, who is seeking a cure in a sanatorium in Davos, high up in the Swiss Alps. In the opening chapter, Kastrup leaves his familiar life and obligations, in what he later learns to call the Flatlands, to visit the rarefied mountain air and introspective small world of the sanatorium. Kastrup's departure from the sanatorium is repeatedly delayed by his failing health. What at first appears to be a minor bronchial infection with a slight fever is later diagnosed by the sanatorium's chief doctor and director, Hofrat Behrens, as symptoms of tuberculosis. Kastrup is persuaded by Behrens to stay until his health improves. During his extended stay, Kastrup meets various characters who represent pre-war Europe in miniature. These include Lodovico Settembrini, an Italian humanist and encyclopedist, a student of Gesù Carducci, Leo Naphta, a Jewish Jesuit who favors communistic totalitarianism, Meinher Pieperken, a Dionysian Dutchman, and his romantic interest, Madame Claudia Chauchet. Kastrup eventually resides at the sanatorium for 7 years. As the novel concludes, the war begins, and Kastrup volunteers for the military. His possible demise upon the battlefield is portended. With the groundwork laid, let's now examine literary influence and criticism and its connections to our previous discussions. The Magic Mountain can be interpreted as both a classic example of the European, a novel of education or novel of formation, and as a satire of this genre. Many formal characteristics of the are present. The protagonist begins in a state of immaturity and, through leaving his home environment, is exposed to art, culture, politics, human vulnerability, and love. The novel incorporates reflections on topics such as the experience of time, music, nationalism, sociology, and changes in the natural world. Through Kastrup's stay in the rarefied atmosphere of the Magic Mountain, the narrative offers a panoramic view of pre-World War I European civilization and its underlying tensions. Mann describes the subjective experience of serious illness and the gradual process of medical institutionalization. He also alludes to the irrational forces within the human psyche, at a time when Freudian psychoanalysis was becoming a prominent type of treatment. These themes relate to the development of Kastrup's character over the period covered by the novel. In his discussion of the work, written in English and published in The Atlantic in January 1953, Mann states that what came to understand is that one must go through the deep experience of sickness and death to arrive at a higher sanity and health. Mann also acknowledged his debt to the skeptical insights of Friedrich Nietzsche concerning modern humanity, and he drew from these in creating conversations between the characters. Throughout the book, the author employs the discussions among Settembrini, Naphta, and the medical staff to introduce the young Kastrup to a wide spectrum of competing ideologies about responses to the Age of Enlightenment. However, a classical Bildungsroman would conclude by Kastrup's having become a mature member of society, with his own worldview and greater self-knowledge, while The Magic Mountain ends with Kastrup's becoming one of millions of anonymous conscripts under fire on a World War I battlefield. Now, let's shift our focus to connection to death in Venice and embark on an intellectual exploration of its various dimensions. Mann wrote that he originally planned The Magic Mountain as a novella, a humorous, ironic, satirical and satiric follow-up to Death in Venice, which he had completed in 1912. The atmosphere was derived from the mixture of death and amusement that Mann had encountered while visiting his wife in a Swiss sanatorium. He intended to transfer to a comedic plane the fascination with death and triumph of ecstatic disorder over a life devoted to order, which he had explored in Death in Venice. The atmosphere and the character's journey in The Magic Mountain contrast considerably with the earlier novella. Whereas the protagonist of the novella was the mature and acclaimed author Gustav von Aschenbach, the central figure is now a callow young engineer at the outset of an anticipated career. The alluring Polish adolescent Tadzio in the novella corresponds to the Asiatic flabby Asiatisch Russian Madame Chorchit. The setting has shifted from the densely populated island city on the Adriatic coast to an alpine, quasi-resort-like sanatorium prized for its alleged health-restoring properties. In the next portion, we'll be immersing ourselves in the realm of illness and death and examining its broader implications. The patients suffer from some form of tuberculosis, which dictates their daily routines, thoughts, and conversations as members of the half-lung cub Verinhalblunge. The disease ends fatally for many of the patients, such as the Catholic girl Barbara Hughes, whose fear of death is heightened in Chapter III in a harrowing viaticum scene, and Cousin Zinson, who dies like an ancient hero. The dialogues between Settembrini and Naphta examine life and death from a metaphysical perspective. Besides the deaths from fatal illness, two characters commit suicide, and finally Kastrup goes off to fight in World War I, and it is implied that he will be killed on the battlefield. In the above-mentioned comment, Mann writes, "What Kastrup learns to fathom is that all higher health must have passed through illness and death. As Hans Kastrup once said to Madame Chorchit, there are two ways to life. One is the common, direct, and brave. The other is bad, leading through death, and that is the genius way." This concept of illness and death, as a necessary passage to knowledge, health, and life makes the Magic Mountain into a novel of initiation. Let's now turn our attention to time and uncover the fascinating insights it brings to the table. The treatment of time is a major narrative and philosophical concern in the novel. The novel's structure reflects this through its asymmetrical handling of chronology. The first 5 chapters, approximately half the novel, detail only the initial year of Castup's stay, while the final 2 chapters compress the remaining 6 years. Mann addresses time both as a narrative device and a philosophical concept. Chapter 7, titled By the Ocean of Time, opens with the narrator directly questioning the possibility of narrating time itself. The characters frequently discuss theories of time perception, debating whether time passes more quickly or slowly depending on circumstance and routine. Contemporary philosophical discussions of time, particularly Henry Bergson's concepts of duration and subjective time experience, informed Mann's approach. This influence is evident in the novel's exploration of how time appears to accelerate or decelerate based on the characters' experiences in the sanitarium setting. The Magic Mountain, in essence, embodies the author's meditations on the tempo of experience. The narrative is ordered chronologically but accelerates throughout the novel so that the first 5 chapters, approximately half of the text, relate the first of Castup's 7 years at the sanitarium in great detail. The remaining 6 years, marked by monotony and routine, are described in the last 2 chapters. This asymmetry corresponds to Castup's own skewed perception of the passage of time. This structure reflects the protagonist's thoughts. Throughout the book, they discuss the philosophy of time and debate whether interest and novelty dispel or shorten the content of time, while monotony and emptiness hinder its passage. The characters also reflect on the problems of narration and time, about the correspondence between the length of a narrative and the duration of the events it describes. Mann also meditates upon the interrelationship between the experience of time and space, of time seeming to pass more slowly when one does not move in space. This aspect of the novel mirrors contemporary philosophical and scientific debates which are embodied in Heidegger's writings and Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, in which space and time are inseparable. In essence, Castup's subtly transformed perspective on the flatlands corresponds to a movement in time. Let's now turn our attention to magic and mountains and examine its role within the larger context. The titular reference to mountain reappears in many layers. The sanitarium is located on a mountain, both geographically and figuratively, a separate world. The mountain also represents the opposite of Castup's home, the sober, businesslike flatland. The first part of the novel culminates and ends in the sanitarium carnival feast. There, in a grotesque scene named after Walpurgis Night, the setting is transformed into the Blocksberg, where, according to German tradition, witches and wizards meet in obscene revelry. This is also described in Goethe's Faust. At this event, Castup with Madame Chochit, their subtle conversation is carried on almost wholly in French. Another topos of German literature is the Venus Mountain, which is referred to in Richard Wagner's opera Tannhäuser. This mountain is a hellish paradise, a place of lust and abandon, where time flows differently. The visitor loses all sense of time. Castup, who planned to stay at the sanitarium for 3 weeks, does not leave there for 7 years. In general, the inhabitants of the spend their days in a mythical, distant atmosphere. The X-ray laboratory in the cellar represents the Hades of Greek mythology, where medical director Behrens acts as the judge and punisher Rhadamanthys, and where Castup is a fleeting visitor, like Odysseus. Behrens compares the cousins to Castor and Pollux. Settembrini compares himself to Prometheus. Faustra mentions Sisyphus and Tantalus, albeit confusedly. The culmination of the second part of the novel is perhaps the still episodic chapter of Castup's blizzard dream in the novel simply called Snow. The protagonist gets into a sudden blizzard, beginning a death-bound sleep, dreaming at first of beautiful meadows with blossoms and of lovable young people at a southern seaside, then of a scene reminiscent of a grotesque event in Goethe's Faust, the witch's kitchen, again in Goethe's Blocksberg chapter, and finally ending with a dream of extreme cruelty, the slaughtering of a child by 2 witches, priests of a classic temple. According to Mann, This represents the original and deathly destructive force of nature itself. Castup awakens in due time, escapes from the blizzard, and returns to the... But rethinking his dreams, he concludes that because of charity and love, man should never allow death to rule one's thoughts. Castup soon forgets this sentence, so for him, the blizzard event remains an interlude. This is the only sentence in the novel that Mann highlighted in italics. There are frequent references to Grimm's fairy tales, based on European myths. The opulent meals are compared to the magically self-laying table of table, donkey, and stick. Frau Engelhart's quest to learn the first name of Madame Chochet mirrors that of the Queen in Rumpelstiltskin. Castup's given name is the same as Clever Hans. Although the ending is not explicit, it is possible that Castup dies on the battlefield. Mann leaves his fate unresolved. Mann makes use of the number 7, often believed to have magical qualities. Castup was 7 when his parents died. He stays 7 years from the years 1907 to 1914. The central Walpurgis night scene happens after 7 months. Both cousins have 7 letters in their last name. The dining hall has 7 tables. Madame Chochet is initially assigned room number 7. The digits of Castup's room number 34 add up to 7, and Joachim's room is a multiple of 7. Settembrini's name includes 7 in Italian. Joachim keeps a thermometer in his mouth for 7 minutes, and Minher Pieperken announces his suicide in a group of 7. Joachim decides to leave after a stay of 7 times 70 days and dies at 7 o'clock. The novel itself, moreover, is divided into 7 chapters. As we enter this new chapter, let's navigate the complexities of music and unravel its multifaceted nature. Hans Castup loved music from his heart. It worked upon him much the same way as did his breakfast porter, with a deeply soothing, narcotic effect, tempting him to doze. Chapter 3. There is something suspicious about music, gentlemen. I insist that she is, by her nature, equivocal. I shall not be going too far in saying at once that she is politically suspect. Herr Settembrini. 4. Mann gives a central role to music in this novel. People at the listen to Der Lindenbaum from the Winter Eyes played on a gramophone. This piece is full of mourning in the view of death and hints at an invitation to suicide. In the book's final scene, Castup, now an ordinary soldier on Germany's Western Front in World War I, hums the song to himself as his unit advances in battle. Moving forward, we'll be taking a closer look at allegorical characters. Mann uses the novel's main characters to introduce Castup to the ideas and ideologies of his time. The author observed that the characters are all exponents, representatives, and messengers of intellectual districts, principles, and worlds, hoping that he had not made them mere wandering allegories. Without further ado, let's move on to the topic of Castup. Thumbuckwriter Parzival, knights ascend to the Grail Castle according to Mann. The protagonist is a questing knight, the pure fool looking for the Holy Grail in the tradition of Parzival. However, he remains pale and mediocre, representing a German bourgeois that is torn between conflicting influences capable of the highest humanistic ideals, yet at the same time prone to both stubborn Philistinism and radical ideologies. As usual, Mann chooses his protagonist's name carefully. Hans is a generic German first name, almost anonymous, but also refers to the fairy tale figure of Hans im Glöck and the Apostle Street John Johannes in German, the favorite disciple of Jesus, who beholds the revelation in German. Castup is the name of a historically prominent family in Mann's hometown, Lübeck, which provided at least 3 generations of mayors for the town in the era of the Renaissance. The Torp is Danish, not unexpected on the German north coast. Castup also refers to the twins Castor and Pollux in Greek mythology, who were identified by the New Testament scholar Dennis MacDonald as models for the apostles James and John. In a way, Hans Castup can be seen as the incorporation of the young Weimar Republic. Humanism and radicalism, represented by Settembrini and Nafer, try to win his favor, but Castup is unable to decide. His body temperature is a subtle metaphor for his lack of clarity, Following Schiller's theory of fever, Carstup's temperature is, which is neither healthy nor ill, but an intermediate point. Furthermore, the outside temperature in Carstup's residence is out of balance. It is either too warm or too cold and tends to extremes, e.g. snow in August, but never normal. According to Christian Kracht, Hans Carstup experienced the elevation of his temperature as lifting him to an elevated state of being. The most pronounced instance of Thomas Mann's political conversion is in the Schnee Snow chapter. Completed in June 1923, this chapter, which forms the philosophical heart of the novel, attempts to overcome apparent contrasts and find a compromise between Nafta's and Settembrini's positions. In the chapter Humaniora, written in 1920, Carstup tells Barons, in a discussion on medical matters, that an interest in life means an interest in death. In the Schnee chapter, Carstup comes to exactly the opposite conclusion. The basis for Carstup's contradiction can be found in the speech on the German Republic, written in the previous year, in which Mann outlines his position with regards to the precedence of life and humanity over death. Even though Carstup could not possibly have learned from either Nafta or Settembrini the idea that the experience of death is ultimately that of life and leads to a new appreciation of humanity, Mann was determined from at least September 1922 onwards to make this message the main point of his novel. In a letter of 4 September 1922 to Arthur Schnitzler, Mann refers to Von Deutsche Republik, in which, he says, he is endeavoring to win the German middle classes over to the cause of the Republic and humanitarian concerns, and adds that his newfound passion for humanitarianism is closely related to the novel on which he is working. In the climax of the Schnee chapter, Carstup's vision is of the triumph of life, love, and human concern over sickness and death. This realization corresponds closely to Mann's key observation in Von Deutsche Republik. As if to dispel any lingering doubts, Mann makes the meaning absolutely clear in his Tischrede in Amsterdam, held on 3 May 1924. Death stands for the ultra-conservative opponents of the Republic, while life embodies the supporters of democracy, the only way to guarantee a humanitarian future. The Schnee chapter was written in the first half of 1923, and the italicization of the key sentence was probably requested by Mann when the book was set in print in 1924, as a message to the readers of the time, who, after years of hyperinflation and political turmoil, not only expected but also desperately needed a positive direction to their lives, some words of wisdom which would give them hope. The time has come to unravel the secrets behind Settembrini, humanism, and gain a deeper understanding. Settembrini represents the active and positive ideal of the Enlightenment, of humanism, democracy, tolerance, and human rights. He often finds Carstup literally in the dark and switches on the light before their conversations. He compares himself to Prometheus of Greek mythology, who brought fire and enlightenment to man. His own mentor Giuseppe Carducci has even written a hymn to another lightbringer, Lucifer, La Forza Vindis della Ragione. His ethics are based on bourgeois values and labor. He tries to counter Carstup's morbid fascination with death and disease, warns him against the Ilmadam Chochet, and tries to demonstrate a positive outlook on life. His antagonist Nafta describes him as Zivilisationsliterate, meaning cosmopolitan, un-German intellectuals. Mann originally constructed Settembrini as a caricature of the liberal democratic novelist represented, for example, by his own brother Heinrich Mann. However, while the novel was being written, Mann himself became an outspoken supporter of the Weimar Republic, precipitated by the assassination of then German Foreign Minister Walther Rathenau, whom Mann deeply admired, which may explain why Settembrini, especially in the later chapters, becomes the Sprachrohr der Autorin, the voice of the author. Now, let's shift our perspective and explore Nafta radicalism through a fresh lens, unlocking new perspectives. Settembrini's antagonist Nafta was Jewish but joined the Jesuits and became a Hegelian Marxist. The character was a parody of the philosopher Georg Lux, who plainly has not recognized himself in Nafta, wrote Mann in a 1949 letter. Even here a change in Mann's political stance can be seen. In Operations Spirituals from Chapter 6, written towards the end of 1922, Nafta is termed a revolutionary and socialist, but Settembrini sees Nafta's fantasies as emanating from an anti-humanitarian reactionary revolution des Humanen Rochlis. In this chapter, the terrorism championed by Nafta is no longer, in Kastup's eyes, associated solely with the dictature des proletariats, but also with conservative Prussian militarism and Jesuitism. The association here between Nafta's advocacy of terrorism and two extremely conservative movements, Prussian militarism and Jesuitism, is a huge political shift for the novel. Terrorism, up till now exclusively the province of the Communist Revolution, is now suddenly also an instrument of reactionary conservatism. In a clear allusion on Mann's part to the assassination of Walter Rathenau, Nafta goes into the motivation of the revolutionary who killed Councillor of State August von Kotzebue in 1819, and concludes that it was not just the desire for freedom at stake here but also moral fanaticism and political outrage. That this is a direct reference to the death of Rathenau is borne out by the fact that in the first edition Mann refers to the shooting of Kotzebue, whereas he was in fact stabbed. Alerted to this mistake by Max Rieger, Mann replied on 1 September 1925 that he would rectify the error at the first opportunity. Mann changed the word to for future editions. For the 1924 readership, however, the association with Rathenau could not have been clearer. In the upcoming section, we'll be dissecting Chauchat, love and temptation, and exploring its implications in greater detail. Claudia Chauchat represents erotic temptation, lust, and love, all in a degenerate, morbid, Asiatic flabby form. She is one of the major reasons for Kastup's extended stay on the Magic Mountain. The female promise of sensual pleasure as a hindrance to male zest for action imitates the themes from the Circe mythos and in the nymphs in Wagner's Venus Mountain. Chauchat's feline characteristics are noted often. Her last name is derived from the French, and her first name includes the English claw. Her name may also be a reference to the Chauchat machine gun, a French weapon that saw significant use by the French and American forces during World War I. Chauchat could also be a play on words with chord and chat in French slang. Claudia Chauchat leaves for some time, but she returns with an impressive companion, Minor Peeperkin, who suffers from a tropical disease. In the upcoming section, we'll be dissecting Peeperkin, the Dionysian principle, and exploring its intricate connections to our topic. Minor Peeperkin, Claudia Chauchat's new lover, enters the scenery late, but he is one of the most commanding persons in the novel. His behavior and personality, with its flavor of importance, combined with obvious awkwardness and the strange inability ever to complete a statement, is reminiscent of certain figures in former novellas of the author, e.g. Hector John in Tristan figures, which are, on the one hand, admired because of their vital energy, and, on the other hand, condemned because of their novit. In total, this person represents the grotesqueness of a Dionysian character. The Greek god Dionysus is also important in Nietzschean philosophy, whose The Birth of Tragedy is the source of the title The Magic Mountain. Peeperkin ends his life by suicide, also performed in a strange manner. Minor Peeperkin was used by the author to personify his rival, the influential German poet Gerhard Hauptmann, and even certain aspects of Goethe with whom Hauptmann often was compared. One scholar has postulated that the character of Minor Peeperkin, who revels in lavish meals, was intended as a mirror image of Kafka's hunger artist. In this section, we'll be peeling back the layers of Ziemssen, duty to reveal its true essence. Joachim Ziemssen, Hans Kastup's cousin, is described as a young person representing the ideals of loyalty and faithfulness as an officer. As already mentioned, Dr. Behrens alludes to the pair as Castorp and Pollux, the twin brothers of the Greek mythology. And in fact, there is some affinity between the two cousins, both in their love to Russian women, Claudia Chauchat in the case of Hans Kastup, the female co-patient Marusha in the case of Joachim Ziemssen, and also in their ideals. But, in contrast to Hans Kastup, who is an assertive person on the scene, Joachim Ziemssen is rather shy, known to stand somehow outside of the community. He tries to escape from what he, unspokenly, feels to be a morbid atmosphere. After long discussions with his cousin, and in spite of being warned by Dr. Behrens, he returns to the flatlands, where he fulfills his military duties for some time. But after a while, forced by deterioration of his lungs, he returns to the... It is, however, too late for a successful treatment of his illness, and he dies in the sanatorium. His death is described in a moving chapter of the novel, with the title as a soldier, and a good one, again a well-known citation from Goethe's Faust. As we venture forward, let's take a closer look at in popular culture and its impact on our understanding. The Magic Mountain is mentioned in the film The Wind Rises 2013, directed by Hayao Miyazaki, by a German character named Hans Castorp. Nobel laureate Czesław Miłosz borrowed the title for his poem, A Magic Mountain. The novel is mentioned in the Dick Van Dyke Show episode That's My Boy. Season 3, Episode 1. With all the mix-ups at the hospital between the Petries and the Peters, and each getting the other's stuff, Rob is trying to determine if he and Laura brought home the right baby, so he goes to check the baby's footprints, which he tells his neighbor are kept in the Magic Mountain. "Ha," says Jerry. "The book," says Rob. Jerry finds the footprints and reads the book's title, Oh, Thomas Mann, and then they cover the kid's foot with blue ink. The 2016 psychological horror film A Cure for Wellness was inspired by Mann's novel. The Imputium, a health resort horror story, the 2022 novel by Nobel Prize laureate Olga Tokarczuk, is said to be part homage and part rejoinder to the Magic Mountain. In this segment, we'll be unraveling the complexities of films and exploring its multifaceted nature. Der Zauberberg, a German black and white TV production in 1968 by Sender Fries Berlin. The Magic Mountain, 1982 film. As we enter this new phase, let's uncover the impact of translations into English on our broader topic. The Magic Mountain, translated into English by H.T. Lowe Porter with an afterword by the author, 1927, Secker and Warburg, SBN 436-27237 to The Magic Mountain, a new translation into English by John East. Woods, 1996. This won the Helen and Kurt Wolff Translators Prize in 1996. In 2024, Susan Bernowski was reported to be working on a translation of The Magic Mountain, as was Simon Pear. Both translators have been reporting on their work on their respective blogs. Our translation is to Susan Bernowski blog. I appreciate your time and I'm grateful for every like, comment, and share.